All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about something fascinating. We're diving into the mind of a scientific pioneer, a guy who actually dared to try and map the human soul. We're going to explore how William James, one of the founders of modern psychology, took his own personal breakdown and turned it into this incredible, revolutionary framework for understanding, well, life's most profound and mystical experience. And here's the thing, this whole journey, it doesn't start with some neat, tidy theory in a lab. No, it starts with a terrifying personal collapse. I mean, we're not talking about just a bad day here. This was the complete disintegration of his entire worldview, and he was experiencing it all from the inside. So that quote you just saw, that's him. That's the profound existential dread that hit William James back in 1870. And it was a crisis that just shattered his scientific, materialistic understanding of everything. And here's a wild little detail. It was a terror he weirdly shared with his own father, who had a similar experience decades earlier. It's almost like it was a family inheritance of death. You have to understand who this guy was. William James was trained to believe only in what could be observed, measured, and explained by physical laws, right? He came from this elite intellectual family, hanging out with people like Ralph Waldo Emerson. But then his own mind rebels against him. And in the face of that, his purely scientific toolkit, it felt completely, utterly useless. So if you look at his life, everything was pointing him towards a career in rational thought. But then 1870 happens. That severe crisis, which was kicked off by his cousin's death and his own constant health problems. It forced him to ask this huge question. Can science really explain the full, messy, sometimes terrifying reality of being human? And, his lifeline, the thing that pulled him out, came from a really unexpected place, a French philosopher named Charles Renouvier, whose ideas about free will gave him just enough of a foothold to start climbing out of that despair. Okay, so to find his way out of this crisis, James realized he didn't just need a new idea. He needed a completely new way of thinking about what an idea even is. And that's what led him to develop a philosophy that would totally change how we think about truth itself. It's called pragmatism. Now, pragmatism, it's a really radical idea, especially for his time. James basically said, look, forget about whether a belief lines up perfectly with some abstract, objective reality out there. He said the only question that really matters is this. What practical difference does this belief make in your actual day-to-day life? And this really shows you the fundamental shift. So instead of asking, is this idea objectively real, pragmatism asks, what's the cash value of this idea? I love that phrase. Basically, does it work? Does it give you hope? Does it make you a better person? Does it help you when you're grieving? If the answer to those questions is yes, then for you in your life, that idea holds true. Right. So that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? What about things you can't prove, like God or a spiritual experience? And this is exactly where James's philosophy becomes this revolutionary tool. See, it's not about proving or disproving faith. It's about taking it seriously as a powerful, undeniable force in people's lives. Okay, so now James the psychologist puts on his psychologist hat and turns his gaze inward. He literally starts to map the inner landscape where these kinds of profound experiences happen. And he kicks things off by identifying two fundamental types of people, two totally distinct ways of experiencing the world. So on one side, you've got the healthy-minded. These are the optimists, the once-born, as he called them. They see the world as basically good. But James, because he'd been there himself, was way more interested in the sick soul. These are the twice-born. These are the folks who feel like there's something deeply wrong with the world, and they feel this profound split inside themselves. They are just acutely aware of suffering and evil, and they feel like they need some kind of radical transformation just to be made whole again. So for the sick soul, life is this journey, right? From inner conflict towards becoming whole, towards unification. And James saw this conversion not as some supernatural miracle, but as a deeply psychological process. It's a radical shift in the very center of a person's energy. But that leads to the next question. How does that shift even happen? Where does all this new energy come from? Well, for James, the answer was the subconscious mind. He actually believed the discovery of the subconscious was the single biggest leap forward psychology had ever made. He pictured it as this kind of borderland, right? A permeable membrane between our normal, everyday consciousness and some wider, bigger reality out there. He thought it was the exact point of contact, the door, through which these transformative energies could flow into our lives. So now that he has a sort of psychological location for these events, James does something pretty remarkable. He starts approaching the mystical experience like a biologist discovering and classifying a new species. Seriously, he collected hundreds of firsthand accounts from all through history, from different cultures, different religions, and he just started looking for the common patterns. He was looking for the shared DNA of transcendence. And you know what? He found them. He boiled it down to 4 core characteristics. First, they're ineffable. You just can't put the experience into words. It's more of a feeling, you know? Second, they have a noetic quality. This is huge. It's not just a feeling. It's a feeling of knowing something, of gaining a deep insight into truth. And finally, transiency and passivity. They don't last very long, and while it's happening, you feel like you're not in control, like you're being held or acted upon by some outside force. What's cool is that James saw all of these experiences as existing on a spectrum. It could be something as simple as, suddenly getting the real meaning of a word you've heard a million times, or that weird fleeting feeling of déjà vu. We've all had that. But that same spectrum extends all the way to profound trance states, and what he thought was the absolute peak, the experience of presence, just this overwhelming direct awareness of a divine or higher power. And this brings us right back around, full circle, to pragmatism. It brings us to James's final, and maybe his most powerful conclusion. Okay, so if we can't objectively prove where these experiences come from, how in the world are we supposed to judge their value or their truth? For James, the answer was simple, and it became his ultimate test. He basically argued that it's a fool's errand to argue about the roots of an experience. Was it just a blip in your brain chemistry? Was it a psychological projection? Or was it a genuine divine encounter? He said, you know what? Ultimately, it doesn't matter. What matters are the fruits. So what that means is we have to shift our question entirely. We have to stop asking where did it come from and start asking what did it lead to? We need to judge the experience based on its long-term effects on a person's life, their character, their actions in the world. Because really, that's the only data we can actually observe and evaluate. And when James looked, he saw that across all sorts of different traditions, these genuinely transformative mystical experiences tended to produce very similar results, what he called the virtues of sainthood. And we're not talking about abstract qualities here. We're talking about practical, observable changes. The person becomes more loving, more compassionate, they have a new kind of emotional strength, they're less selfish, they're more willing to endure hardship for a higher purpose. So his bottom line was this: if an experience leads to a life that is demonstrably better, more courageous, and more loving, well then, pragmatically speaking, that experience holds a profound truth. And that, right there, is the challenge William James leaves us with. He created a framework that allows a scientific mind to take the soul seriously, without having to abandon intellectual rigor. He's suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the ultimate test of any belief, spiritual or otherwise, isn't found in a lab or in some dusty philosophical argument. Maybe the ultimate test is found in the kind of person that belief helps you become. So I'll leave you with that question. What do you think? Are the most important truths the ones we prove or the ones we live?